Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In this episode, Kwame and Nia dive deeper into a world of shadows and twisted illusions as they face their most sinister trials yet. As they trek through a labyrinth of darkness, they confront tormenting apparitions from their past, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. With every step, a malevolent force looms closer, testing their will and threatening to consume them. But their encounter with a horrifying entity, the guardian of the Shadow Realm, reveals chilling truths about the power they seek to vanquish, and the cost it demands. Stay tuned as Kwame and Nia's resilience is pushed to the breaking point. The group moved cautiously through the thickening darkness, the oppressive weight of the void pressing down on them. Each step felt like wading through a dense fog, their movements sluggish as if the darkness itself resisted their advance. The spirits that swirled around them grew more malevolent, their whispers rising in a cacophony of voices that tugged at the edges of their sanity. Kwame could feel the darkness within him responding to the spirits, growing more insistent, more alive. It whispered promises of power, of victory over the curse, but at a cost that he wasn't sure he could pay. He pushed the thoughts away, focusing on the task at hand. They had to find the source of the curse, whatever it was, and destroy it before it destroyed them. But the void seemed endless, a labyrinth with no clear path, and the farther they went, the more the spirits closed in on them. The faces in the darkness grew more defined, more familiar. Kwame stopped in his tracks as he recognized one of the faces, his mother's, twisted and grotesque, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and anger. "You abandoned us," the spirit hissed, her voice a distorted echo of his mother's. "You let us die." Kwame recoiled, but the spirit lunged forward, its hands reaching for him, icy cold fingers brushing against his skin. He fought to control the darkness within him, to keep it from responding to the spirit's provocation. "I didn't abandon you," Kwame said through gritted teeth. "You were taken from me." But the spirit only laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down his spine. "You could have saved us, but you were too weak. Just like you are now." Kwame's vision blurred with tears, the weight of guilt pressing down on him. The darkness inside him surged, responding to his emotional turmoil, and for a moment, he considered letting it take over, letting it end his pain. But Nia's voice broke through the haze, pulling him back. "Kwame, don't listen to it. It's not real." He blinked, shaking his head to clear it. The spirit was gone, dissolved back into the shadows. Nia stood in front of him, her eyes wide with concern. "They are trying to break us," she said, her voice steady but laced with fear. "We can't let them. We have to stay strong." Kwame nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right. Let's keep moving." They pressed on, but the darkness continued to play tricks on their minds. Every few steps, another spirit would emerge from the shadows, taking the form of a loved one lost to the curse, each one accusing, blaming, trying to drag them down into despair. The path ahead began to narrow, the darkness closing in until they were forced to walk single file. The walls of the void seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the ground beneath their feet became slick with a substance that felt like blood. The air grew thicker, almost suffocating, and a low, rhythmic sound began to vibrate through the void, like the beating of a massive heart. "We are close," Boko whispered, his voice trembling. "I can feel it." But there was something else in the air now, a new presence, one that was even more sinister than the spirits. It was ancient and powerful, and it watched them with a cold, calculating intelligence. Kwame felt it before he saw it, a wave of malevolence that washed over him, making the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. And then, out of the darkness, it emerged. It was a being unlike anything they had ever seen, a massive, towering figure, its body composed of shadows and writhing tendrils of darkness. Its eyes were deep, bottomless pits of pure evil, and its presence radiated a cold, suffocating power. This was the source of the curse, the entity that had created it, nurtured it, then spread it across the land. The creature's voice echoed through the void, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. You have come far, mortals, but your journey ends here. Kwame and the others drew their weapons, though they knew they were no match for a being of such power. But they had no choice, they had come this far, and there was no turning back now. What are you? Kwame demanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. The creature's eyes glowed with a sinister light. I am the darkness that lies at the heart of all things. I am the void, the end of all life, the curse that will consume your world. Amina stepped forward, her hand raised as she summoned the dark power within her. We won't let you destroy our world. We'll fight you with everything we have. The creature laughed, the sound that sent waves of fear through the group. You are already mine, it hissed. The darkness you wield is but a fragment of my power. You cannot defeat me, for I am the source of all darkness. Kwame could feel the truth in the creature's words, the darkness within him resonating with the creature's presence. But he also knew that they had no choice but to fight. If they didn't, their world would be lost. Then we'll die trying, Kwame said, his voice firm. The creature's eyes narrowed. So be it. With a roar, the creature lunged at them, its tendrils of darkness lashing out like whips. The group scattered, dodging the attacks as they tried to strike back. But their weapons were useless against the creature's shadowy form, passing through it as if it were nothing more than smoke. Amina chanted a spell, summoning a bolt of dark energy that she hurled at the creature. It struck the creature in the chest, but instead of harming it, the energy was absorbed into the creature's body, making it stronger. Kwame swung his sword at one of the tendrils, but the blade passed through it harmlessly. The creature retaliated with a backhand swipe that sent him flying across the void, slamming into the ground with a bone-jarring impact. As he struggled to his feet, he realized that they couldn't fight the creature head-on. They needed to find a way to destroy it at its core, to sever its connection to the curse and the darkness that fed it. But how? The creature was too powerful, too deeply connected to the void. And with each passing moment, the darkness within Kwame grew stronger, feeding off the creature's power, threatening to consume him entirely. He looked at Amina, who was fighting off the tendrils with every ounce of strength she had, and he knew what he had to do. It was the only way. Amina, he shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. I have a plan, but I need you to trust me. She glanced at him, her eyes filled with desperation and determination. What do you need? Distract it, he yelled. Give me time to get close. Without hesitation, Amina nodded and threw herself into the fight with renewed vigor, drawing the creature's attention with a series of powerful spells. The creature roared in anger, turning its focus on her, giving Kwame the opening he needed. He reached deep within himself, summoning the darkness that had been growing inside him since they first encountered the curse. He could feel it pulsating with raw power, a dark, twisted force that threatened to consume him, but he held it in check, focusing it into a single point. With a cry of determination, Kwame charged at the creature, plunging his hand into its shadowy chest. The darkness within him surged, merging with the creature's essence, and for a moment, Kwame felt himself slipping away, losing himself to the void. But he held on, channeling the darkness into a single, focused strike. He could feel the creature's power buckling under the assault, the connection between it and the curse beginning to fray. With one final, desperate push, Kwame unleashed the full force of the darkness within him, pouring it into the creature's core. The void around them erupted in a blinding flash of light, and the creature let out a piercing scream as it began to dissolve, its form unraveling like smoke in the wind. Kwame fell to his knees, his strength completely spent, as the creature disintegrated into nothingness. The void around them began to collapse, the oppressive darkness lifting as the curse was finally broken. Amina rushed to his side, pulling him to his feet as the void continued to dissolve around them. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and relief. Kwame nodded, though he could barely comprehend what had just happened. They had defeated the source of the curse, but at what cost? The darkness within him was gone, leaving him feeling hollow and empty, as if a part of him had been ripped away. But as the void faded and the world around them began to reappear, he knew that they had won. The curse was broken, and their world was saved. For now. The village of Niasai was eerily silent as Kwame and Amina emerged from the void. The bright light of the sun was a stark contrast to the darkness they had just escaped, but there was no comfort in it. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wood and decay, and the once vibrant village was now nothing more than a ghostly shadow of its former self. Kwame felt a deep exhaustion in his bones, the darkness that had fueled him now an empty void inside him. He staggered forward, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a physical burden. Amina followed closely, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. The village was silent, too silent. But the silence was broken by a low, menacing laugh that echoed through the empty streets. Kwame froze, his heart racing as he turned to face the source of the sound. Standing in the middle of the village square was a figure cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It was a woman, tall and thin, with hair as black as the void they had just left. She exuded a dark power that was almost suffocating, and Kwame could feel the darkness within him stir in response. "Congratulations," the woman said, her voice smooth and cold. "You've managed to defeat the void. But did you really think it would be that easy? The void is just a doorway, a passageway between this world and the one that lies beyond. And now, you've opened it." Kwame clenched his fists, the exhaustion forgotten as anger surged through him. "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman smiled, a cruel twist of her lips. "I am the one who controls the darkness, the one who has been watching you from the beginning. You thought you were fighting a curse, but you were just playing into my hands." Amina stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with anger. "We defeated the void. The curse is broken. You have no power here." The woman laughed again, a sound that sent chills down Kwame's spine. "You're so naive. The curse was just the beginning. The real power lies in the darkness that you've unleashed. And now, it's time to pay the price." She raised her hand, and the ground beneath their feet began to shake. The shadows that had been cast by the sun began to writhe and twist, forming into dark, twisted figures that rose from the ground like specters. These shadow creatures had no faces, but their presence was overwhelming, a suffocating darkness that seemed to suck the air from the village. Kwame and Amina stood their ground, summoning the last remnants of their power. But the darkness was too strong, too overwhelming. The shadow creatures lunged at them, their twisted forms moving with unnatural speed. Kwame slashed at them with his sword, but it passed through them harmlessly, as if they were made of smoke. Amina cast spell after spell, but each one was absorbed by the darkness, making the creatures stronger. "We can't fight them like this," Amina shouted, her voice filled with desperation. "We need to find the source of their power." Kwame nodded, his mind racing. The woman was the key, she was the one controlling the darkness. But how could they defeat someone so powerful, someone who had been manipulating them from the start? As if reading his thoughts, the woman smiled again. "You're right, Kwame. You can't defeat me. But there's one thing you can do. She raised her hand, and a dark, swirling vortex appeared in the sky above them. The air around them grew cold, and the ground began to crack and crumble beneath their feet. The vortex was a portal, the gateway to the void, and it was growing larger by the second. You can surrender, the woman said, her voice filled with dark amusement. Give yourself to the darkness, and I will spare your village. But if you resist, I will destroy everything you hold dear. Kwame felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The darkness within him was growing stronger, feeding off his fear and desperation. He knew that if he gave in, if he surrendered to the darkness, he would lose himself forever. But if he didn't, the village, his home, would be destroyed. Amina grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. Don't do it, Kwame. There has to be another way. But the darkness was too strong, too overwhelming. Kwame could feel it pulling at him, tugging at his soul, promising him power and salvation in exchange for his surrender. He looked at Amina, the desperation in her eyes mirroring his own. He couldn't let her down, couldn't let the darkness win. But as the vortex grew larger, swallowing the sky and casting the village in shadow, he knew that his options were running out. With a deep breath, Kwame made his decision. He reached deep within himself, summoning the last remnants of his strength, and launched himself at the woman with a cry of defiance. He felt the darkness surge within him, a torrent of power that threatened to consume him, but he held on, focusing it into a single, devastating strike. The woman's eyes widened in surprise as Kwame's sword plunged into her chest, the blade crackling with dark energy. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the two of them locked eyes, the darkness swirling around them like a storm. And then, with a scream of fury, the woman exploded into a burst of dark energy, the force of the explosion sending Kwame flying backwards. The shadow creatures dissolved into nothingness, and the vortex in the sky began to shrink, the darkness receding as quickly as it had appeared. Kwame lay on the ground, gasping for breath, his body battered and broken. He had done it. He had defeated the darkness. But as the sky cleared and the sun returned, he knew that the battle was far from over. The darkness was still inside him, the constant presence that would never go away. And as long as it existed, there would always be a threat to his world, a danger lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. As they stepped into the clearing, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, swirling around the altar as if alive. Kwame and Amina approached cautiously, their senses on high alert. They could feel the ancient power that permeated the clearing, a dark force that made their skin prickle and their hearts race. Suddenly, the witches emerged from the darkness, their figures shrouded in long, tattered robes. Their eyes glowed with a strange, eerie light, and their faces were obscured by shadow. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their steps silent and deliberate. "Welcome," one of the witches intoned, her voice a low, rasping whisper that seemed to echo from all directions. "We have been expecting you." Kwame and Amina exchanged uneasy glances. "We need your help," Kwame said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We've been cursed, and the darkness inside me is growing stronger. We need to get rid of it before it consumes me." The witches regarded him with inscrutable eyes, their expressions hidden beneath the folds of their robes. "The darkness is not something that can be easily removed," another witch said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "It is a part of you now, and to remove it, we must perform a ritual, and a dangerous and demanding ritual." Amina stepped forward, her voice firm. "We are willing to do whatever it takes. Just tell us what we need to do." The witches exchanged a series of low, guttural sounds, their voices merging into a haunting chant. The runes on the altar began to glow brighter, casting a pale light that danced across the clearing. The witches moved with practiced precision, their hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. "The ritual will require a sacrifice," the first witch said, her eyes locking onto Kwame's. "A powerful offering to balance the scales and purge the darkness." You must give up something of great personal value, something that is intimately tied to your soul. Kwame's heart sank. He had feared this would be the case. The darkness inside him had already cost him so much, and now it seemed he would have to give up even more. What kind of sacrifice? Amina asked, her voice tinged with concern. What if we don't have anything that can serve as an offering? The witch's eyes narrowed. The sacrifice must be something that holds deep significance, something that represents the essence of who you are. Only then will the darkness be truly purged. Kwame hesitated, his mind racing. What could he offer? His sword, his home, his memories. The darkness had already taken so much from him, and now it seemed he would have to part with something even more precious. Amina placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We'll find a way, she said softly. We'll make sure the ritual succeeds. The witches began their preparations, arranging objects and ingredients around the altar. They chanted in a language that was both foreign and unsettling, their voices rising and falling in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern. The runes on the altar pulsed with a dark, hypnotic light, and the air grew thick with the smell of burning herbs and incense. Kwame looked around the clearing, searching for inspiration. He thought of his village, his family, his friends, all the things he had lost and sacrificed in his fight against the darkness. And then, he realized what he had to do. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden amulet. It was a gift from his mother, a token of her love and protection. It had been with him through every trial, every battle, and it represented everything he held dear. With trembling hands, he placed the amulet on the altar. The witches stopped their chanting and turned to him, their eyes glowing with approval. This is a worthy sacrifice, the first witch said. It represents your deepest connections and your enduring spirit. It will be the key to your salvation. The witches resumed their chant, their voices growing louder and more intense. The runes on the altar blazed with a brilliant light, and the ground beneath Kwame's feet began to tremble. The darkness within him roared in fury, trying to resist the ritual, but the combined power of the witches and the sacrifice held it at bay. Kwame felt a searing pain as the darkness within him was pulled out, writhing and twisting like a living thing. The amulet on the altar glowed with a blinding light, and the shadows that had plagued him began to dissolve, consumed by the ritual's energy. The process was agonizing, every fiber of his being screaming in protest. But he held on, his mind focused on the hope of freedom from the darkness. The pain was intense, but he could feel the darkness slipping away, leaving him lighter, freer. Finally, with a final, earth-shattering explosion of light, the ritual reached its climax. The darkness was gone, leaving only a lingering sense of emptiness and exhaustion. Kwame collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, as the witches stepped back, their faces serene. You have succeeded, the first witch said, her voice echoing with ancient power. The darkness has been purged, and you are free from its grip. But remember, Kwame, the darkness has left its mark on you. You must be vigilant, for its influence may linger in unexpected ways. Kwame nodded weakly, his mind reeling from the ordeal. The darkness was gone, but the scars it had left behind would take time to heal. Amina helped him to his feet, her eyes filled with relief and concern. Are you okay? Kwame nodded, at a faint smile on his lips. I think so. Thank you. The witches began to retreat into the shadows, their forms fading as they moved. You are free now, the first witch said, her voice fading into the darkness. But remember, the balance of power is delicate. Keep your heart pure, and beware of the shadows that lurk in the corners of your world. As the witches disappeared into the night, Kwame and Amina stood in the clearing, the weight of their journey settling heavily on their shoulders. The village awaited them, and the world beyond was still fraught with danger. But for now, they had achieved a measure of peace, a respite from the darkness that had threatened to consume them. They began their journey back to Niasai, their hearts heavy but hopeful. The road ahead was uncertain, but with the darkness behind them, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Kwame and Amina came upon a clearing bathed in an eerie, spectral light. At the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its trunk twisted and scarred, with dark tendrils of shadow wrapping around its roots. The whispers were now a cacophony of voices, overlapping and merging into a haunting symphony that seemed to come from the very heart of the tree. Kwame felt a shiver run down his spine. The tree seemed to be alive, its branches moving rhythmically as though in a macabre dance. The whispers coalesced into words that were barely audible but unmistakably ominous. The price has not yet been paid. Amina clutched her staff, her eyes wide with unease. We have to be careful. This place feels wrong. Kwame nodded, his senses on high alert. He took a step forward, and as he did, the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of tortured voices. The shadows around the tree seemed to writhe and twist, taking on shapes that resembled anguished faces. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Kwame and Amina exchanged alarmed glances as the tree's roots surged upward, forming grotesque, skeletal hands that clawed at the air. The whispers turned into a frenzied roar, and the clearing was filled with a suffocating darkness. We need to get out of here, Amina shouted, but the words were barely audible over the cacophony of voices. Before they could move, the spectral light from the tree intensified, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to reach out and ensnare them. Kwame tried to pull Amina away, but the shadows wrapped around their legs, pulling them toward the tree. Desperation fueled their movements as they struggled against the dark tendrils. Kwame could feel the cold, malevolent force seeping into his bones, and Amina's staff crackled with energy as she attempted to fend off the shadows. In the midst of their struggle, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, gaunt figure cloaked in darkness. Its eyes glowed with a piercing, unnatural light, and its presence seemed to amplify the whispers, turning them into a deafening roar. You have come seeking answers, the figure intoned, its voice echoing with ancient power. But you have not yet paid the price. Kwame and Amina struggled to keep their footing, their strength waning as the darkness continued to press in. Who are you? Kwame demanded, his voice hoarse. What do you want from us? The figure's eyes narrowed, and a cold smile spread across its face. I am the guardian of the Shadow Realm, the keeper of secrets buried deep within the earth. The darkness you seek to escape is a part of me, and it will only release its grip when the balance is restored. As the figure spoke, the tree's roots tightened their hold, and the shadows grew more oppressive. Kwame could feel the darkness creeping into his mind, whispering promises of power and vengeance. It was as if the shadows were trying to seduce him, to turn his fear into a weapon. We cannot stay here, Amina said urgently. We need to find a way to break free. Kwame nodded, his mind racing. He remembered the amulet he had sacrificed during the witch's ritual. It was said to hold a part of his soul, and its power might be the key to breaking the tree's hold. Summoning the last of his strength, Kwame reached into his pouch and retrieved a small, glowing shard, the remnant of the amulet. He held it aloft, its light piercing through the darkness. The guardian's expression twisted into a snarl. You think that trinket can save you? It is but a shadow of what is truly required. With a fierce determination, Kwame thrust the shard toward the tree. The light from the shard intensified, cutting through the shadows and forcing the roots to retract. The whispers turned into agonized screams as the spectral light pushed back the darkness. The guardian recoiled, its form flickering and fading as the shadows began to dissipate. You have only delayed the inevitable, it hissed. The balance is fragile, and the darkness will return. With a final burst of light, the shadows released their grip, and Kwame and Amina fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The clearing was now eerily silent, the spectral light fading into the gloom of the forest. We need to leave, Amina said, her voice trembling. Whatever that was, it's not over. Kwame nodded, his heart pounding. We've uncovered something dark and powerful, but we're not done yet. We need to find out more about this guardian and how it connects to Quito. As they made their way back to the village, the weight of their encounter pressed heavily on them. The echoes of the guardian's words haunted them, a chilling reminder that the darkness they had fought was far from vanquished. The shadows of the past were stirring, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. The forest seemed darker than before, the trees whispering secrets and warnings as they left the clearing behind. Kwame and Amina knew that the real battle was only beginning, and the darkness that had once been a threat was now a lingering presence, watching and waiting for its moment to strike. Will the darkness that had once been a threat and now a lingering presence, watching and waiting strike? Can Kwame and Amina stop it? Join us on our next episode to find out.